The sledgehammer felt heavy in Marcus's trembling hands as Karen's BMW sat gleaming in the police station parking lot, her smug face visible through the windshield as she spoke to the officer inside. She thought she'd gotten away with it hitting his car and speeding off like he didn't matter, like his daughter's car seat in the back meant nothing. But Karen had no idea that Marcus had followed her here, had waited in the shadows, and now stood 20 feet from 2 patrol cars with a tool of justice in his grip. The cops would see everything. Karen would finally pay. And in 10 seconds, her perfect little world would shatter like the glass about to explode across her dashboard. Marcus Rivera adjusted his rearview mirror to check on his 3-year-old daughter, Sophia, who was humming softly while coloring in her princess book. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of his 10-year-old Honda Civic as they sat at the red light on Maple Street, just 2 blocks from Sophia's daycare. "Daddy, look, I made the castle purple." Sophia held up her coloring book, beaming. "Beautiful." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with the simple joy of his daughter's accomplishment. These moments picking Sophia up from daycare, their little conversations. Her infectious giggle were the highlights of his long days working double shifts at the auto repair shop. The light turned green. Marcus checked his mirrors, pressed the gas pedal gently, and began moving forward through the intersection. The impact came from nowhere. A metallic screech filled the air as a white BMW X5 slammed into the passenger side of Marcus's Civic, sending his car spinning across the intersection. The world became a blur of broken glass, screaming metal, and Sophia's terrified cries from the back seat. When the spinning stopped, Marcus's ears were ringing, his shoulder throbbed, and smoke was rising from his crumpled hood. But Sophia's cries, those piercing, frightened sobs, cut through everything else. "Sophia, baby, are you okay?" Marcus twisted around, ignoring the sharp pain in his neck. His daughter was crying but appeared uninjured, still strapped safely in her car seat, though tears streamed down her face. "Daddy, I'm scared." "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. You're safe." Marcus's hands shook as he unbuckled his seatbelt and tried to process what had just happened. His car, his only means of transportation to work, to get Sophia to daycare, to live their life, was destroyed. Through his shattered passenger window, he could see the BMW that had hit them. The luxury SUV had minimal damage compared to his Civica dented front bumper, maybe a broken headlight. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a woman in her mid-40s, blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a designer pantsuit and expensive sunglasses. She looked around frantically, not at Marcus or Sophia, to see if they were hurt, but at the growing crowd of onlookers and the traffic backing up around them. Marcus opened his door and stumbled out, his legs unsteady. Ma'am, are you hurt?" "My daughter," the woman Karen, according to the vanity plates that read Krenskar, barely glanced at him. She was on her phone, her voice sharp and impatient. "Brad, I'm going to be late for the Harrison closing. Some idiot just ran into me on Maple Street." She paused, listening. "No, the car's fine mostly, just a little ding. But there's going to be paperwork and—" "Excuse me," Marcus called out, walking around his destroyed car toward her. "Ma'am, we need to exchange insurance information. Your light was red. You ran the red light." Karen lowered her phone and looked at Marcus for the first time. Her eyes swept over him, dismissively taking in his work clothes, his oil-stained hands, his old Koran. Her expression shifted to one of cold annoyance. "I did not run a red light," she said icily. "You obviously weren't paying attention and pulled out in front of me." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "What? No, that's not T had the green light. You came through the intersection and hit us." "That's not what happened." Karen turned back to her phone. "Brad, I'll call you back. I have to deal with this situation." Sophia was still crying in the car, and Marcus could hear her calling for him. Several people had stopped to help, including an elderly man who was trying to comfort his daughter through the window. "Sir," the elderly man called out, "is your little girl okay? Should I call an ambulance?" "I think she's okay, just scared," Marcus replied, but his attention snapped back to Karen as she started walking back toward her BMW. "Wait, where are you going?" "We need to call the police. We need to exchange information." Karen paused at her driver's door. "I don't have time. For this, my insurance will handle it. File a claim." She tossed a business card at him. It fluttered to the ground near his feet. "You can't just leave," Marcus said, his voice rising. "This is a hit and run if you leave the scene." "I'm not running anywhere. I gave you my information." Karen opened her door. "And next time, maybe you should pay attention when you're driving with a child in the car." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The implication that he had been careless with Sophia's safety, that this accident was somehow his fault when he'd been driving carefully through a green light, ignited something primal in his chest. "You are not leaving," he said firmly, stepping toward her car. "You ran a red light and hit us." "My daughter could have been seriously hurt." Karen's eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't you dare try to tell me what I can and can't do. I have somewhere important to be. And I'm not going to stand here arguing with someone who clearly doesn't understand how insurance works." She slid into her BMW and started the engine. Marcus moved quickly, positioning himself in front of her car. "You're not leaving until the police get here." "Get out of my way," Karen said through her open window, her voice dripping with disdain. "Or I'll call the police myself and tell them you're trying to intimidate me." "Call them, please. Call them. I want them here." But Karen wasn't listening. She put the car in reverse, backed up slightly, then pulled around Marcus and began driving. Away. Marcus ran after her car, shouting, "Hey, stop, you can't leave." But the BMW was already accelerating down Maple Street. The business card she'd thrown lay on the asphalt. Marcus picked it up with trembling hands. Karen Whitfield, real estate agent, Prestige Properties. There was a phone number, but no insurance information. No license plate number written down, nothing that would actually help him file a claim. Sophia was still crying. His car was destroyed, and the woman who had caused it all had just driven. Away like nothing happened, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his hands shaking with rage and adrenaline. But as he waited for the dispatcher to answer, he memorized every detail he could remember about Karen Whitfield and her white BMW with the vanity plates. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When the police officer finally arrived 20 minutes later, Marcus gave his statement while Sophia clung to his leg, still sniffling from the trauma. The officer, a middle-aged man named Sergeant Rodriguez, took notes and examined the damage to Marcus's car. "So she just left?" Rodriguez asked. "Yes, sir. I tried to stop her, but she said she had somewhere important to be and drove off." Rodriguez frowned. "That's definitely leaving the scene of an accident. Do you have her license plate number?" "Krinskar. Vanity plates on a white BMW X5? And she gave you this business card. Threw it at me. More like..." Rodriguez examined the card. "Well, at least we have her information. I'll file a report for hit and run, and we'll follow up with Ms. Whitfield. In the meantime, you'll need to call your insurance company." As the tow truck loaded his destroyed Civic onto its bed, Marcus felt a crushing weight settle on his shoulders. His insurance had a $1,000 deductible he couldn't afford. He'd miss work while dealing with this mess, and Sophia had been traumatized by someone who treated them like they were completely disposable. But what haunted him most was Karen Whitfield's dismissive attitude. The way she'd looked at him like he was beneath her notice, the casual cruelty of suggesting he'd been careless with his daughter's safety as he carried Sophia to wait for his brother to pick them up. Marcus made himself a promise. Karen Whitfield would face consequences for what she'd done today. One way or another, she would pay. 3 days had passed since the accident, and Marcus felt like he was drowning in bureaucracy and bills. His insurance company had been polite, but unhelpful. They needed Karen's insurance information to process his claim, and her business card. Wasn't enough. The police had called Karen's number twice, leaving messages that went unreturned. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, Sophia playing with blocks on the floor nearby, staring at a pile of paperwork that seemed to mock him. For his car, $8,400. Rental car costs while he waited for resolution, $45 per day. Lost wages from missing work, $280 so far, and climbing. His phone rang. Sergeant Rodriguez. "Mr. Rivera, I have an update on your case, but it's not good news." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "We went to Ms. Whitfield's office address. Turns out she hasn't worked there in 6 months. The receptionist said she was let go for some kind of client complaint issue. The phone number on her card is disconnected." "What about her license plate? Can't you track her down that way?" "That's the other problem. I ran the plates, and they're not registered to a Karen Whitfield. They're registered to a Karen Morrison at an address in Riverside Heights. When we went to check, The woman who answered the door said she sold that BMW 3 months ago to some woman who paid cash. No paperwork, no title transfer filed. Marcus felt the room spinning. So she's basically a ghost. Not exactly, but she's definitely made herself hard to find. Look, Mr. Rivera, I'm going to keep working this case, but I have to be honest with you. These kinds of hitandrons are tough to prosecute when someone doesn't want to be found. After Rodriguez hung up, Marcus stared at the business card that had started this whole nightmare. Karen Whitfield, real estate agent, but if she didn't work at Prestige Properties anymore, where was she now? He opened his laptop and started searching. Karen Whitfield, realtor, brought up several hits, but none matched the woman who'd hit his car. Karen Whitfield, BMW, yielded nothing useful. But then he tried Prestige Properties complaint and found something interesting. A better business. Bureau report from 8 months ago. Client filed complaint against agent Karen Whitfield for misrepresentation of property condition and failure to disclose known defects. Client seeks damages of $47,000 for emergency repairs required after purchase. The report included a photo from the real estate listing. It was definitely Karen's same blonde hair, same cold eyes, same entitled expression. Marcus dug deeper. More complaints surfaced. A lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, a state licensing board investigation for unprofessional conduct, and a news article about a charity fraud scandal where she'd allegedly pocketed funds from a children's hospital. Fundraiser. Karen Whitfield wasn't just a hit-and-run driver. She was a professional con artist. But none of this helped him find her current address or real insurance information. That evening, Marcus's brother Carlos came over to help watch Sophia while Marcus worked on the case. Carlos, a tech worker with a talent for internet sleuthing, took one look at the pile of dead ends and cracked his knuckles. "Let me see what I can find," Carlos said, settling in at the laptop. Within an hour, Carlos had worked his magic. She's using social media under the name Karen W. Morrison. Now look at this. The Facebook profile showed Karen at expensive restaurants, posting photos of designer handbags and bragging about her new business ventures. But more importantly, it showed her tagged at specific locations around the city. She checked in at Bella Vista Country Club yesterday, Carlos pointed out. And look at this. She's been posting photos from the same Starbucks location on 5th Street almost every morning for the past 2 weeks. Marcus studied the posts. Karen's arrogance was still there, amplified on social media. She posted photos of her BMW, the same one that had hit his car, with captions like, "Living my best life, and success is the best revenge." She's not even hiding, Marcus muttered. She thinks she got away with it. There's more, Carlos continued, scrolling through Karen's posts. She's been advertising some kind of luxury car rental business on her page. Look at these photos. The images showed Karen posing with various high-end vehicles, Mercedes, Audis, even a Porsche. The captions advertised premium vehicle rentals for discerning clients. And why settle for ordinary when you can drive extraordinary? Marcus's blood ran cold. She's running a car rental scam using vehicles she doesn't own. Looks like it. And based on these posts, she's got clients lined up for this weekend. Some kind of wedding party rental? They found more evidence of Karen's schemes. She was advertising wedding planning services she wasn't licensed to provide, selling investment opportunities in properties she didn't own, and even running a GoFundMe for her medical expenses while posting photos of shopping sprees, spa days. But the worst discovery came when Carlos found a Nextdoor post from 2 weeks ago. Hit-and-run driver needed white BMW, vanity plates Krinscar. This woman destroyed my disabled father's wheelchair-accessible van and fled the scene. Please share. The post included a photo of an elderly man in a wheelchair next to his destroyed van. The damage was extensive, much worse than what had happened to Marcus's car. "She's done this before," Marcus said, his hands clenching into fists. Multiple times, Carlos found 3 more similar posts from different neighborhoods over the past 6 months. Karen had been driving around the city, causing accidents, and disappearing before anyone could hold her accountable. "This woman is a menace," Carlos said. "She's destroying people's lives and just moving on like nothing happened." Marcus thought about Sophia's terrified cries, about the bills piling up on his table, about all the other victims Karen had left. In her wake, the police weren't going to catch her. She was too good at staying ahead of the system. But Marcus had something the police didn't have. Nothing left to lose and a burning need for justice. "I know where she'll be tomorrow morning," he said quietly, pointing to Karen's Starbucks check-ins. "She thinks she's untouchable." Carlos looked at his brother with concern. "Marcus, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Karen Whitfield has been running from consequences her whole life. But tomorrow, they're going to catch up with her." Marcus spent the rest of the evening planning. He wouldn't break any laws. He wasn't a criminal like Karen, but he would make sure she finally faced the justice she'd been dodging as he tucked Sophia into bed. She looked up at him with her big brown eyes and asked, "Daddy, when are we getting our car back?" "Soon, Mia," he promised. "Very soon." But first, Karen Whitfield had an appointment with Karma she didn't even know she'd made. Marcus arrived at the 5th Street Starbucks at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes before Karen's usual check-in time. He'd left Sophia with Carlos, telling his brother he had business to handle. The morning air was crisp, and Marcus felt every nerve in his body humming with anticipation. He chose a table near the window with a clear view of the parking lot and the street. His phone was charged and ready to record. In his jacket pocket, he carried printouts of all the evidence Carlos had found: the social media posts, the other hit-and-run reports, the BBB complaints, everything that proved Karen Whitfield was a predator who targeted innocent people. At exactly 8:03 a.m., the white BMW X5 with vanity plates, Krinskar, pulled into the parking lot. Marcus's pulse quickened as he watched Karen climb out of her car. She was dressed in another expensive outfit, cream-colored blazer and designer jeans that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. She walked into the Starbucks with the same arrogant confidence he remembered from the accident. Seeing Karen ordered her usual a venti caramel macchiato with extra caramel. According to her social media post, San sat down at a table near the back, immediately pulling out her phone to start her daily routine of self-promotional posts. Marcus waited until she was settled, then stood up and walked over to her table. Karen Whitfield. She looked up, and for a split second, Marcus saw recognition flash across her face before she quickly composed herself into a mask of confusion. "I'm sorry, do I know you? You hit my car 3 days ago on Maple Street? You ran a red light, crashed into me and my 3-year-old daughter, then fled the scene." Karen's expression shifted to one of practiced innocence. "I think you have me confused with someone else. I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the photo he'd taken of her business card at the accident scene. "You threw this at me and told me to file an insurance claim, remember?" Other customers were starting to notice the conversation. Karen glanced around nervously, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull here, but I suggest you leave me alone before I call security." A scam. Marcus felt his anger rising, but forced himself to stay calm. "The only scammer here is you, Karen, or should I call you Karen Morrison? That's the name on the registration for the BMW you're driving, isn't it?" Karen's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus pulled out the printed screenshots of her social media posts and spread them on the table. "These are your Facebook posts from this week. Here's your BMW, the same one that hit my car. Here's you bragging about living your best life, while my daughter still has nightmares about the accident." Karen stared at the papers, her coffee forgotten. "You can't. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I've been trying to get them involved for 3 days. In fact, let me help you with that." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. On speaker, 911, "What's your emergency?" "Hi, I'd like to report that I've found the hit-and-run driver who's been evading police for the past 3 days. She's currently at the Starbucks on 5th Street. Karen lunged for the phone, but Marcus held it away from her. "Stop it. Hang up, sir. Can you give me more details?" The dispatcher asked. "The driver's name is Karen Whitfield, also using the alias Karen Morrison. She's driving a white BMW X5 with vanity plates Krinskar. She hit my car on Monday and fled the scene, and I have evidence she's done this to multiple other victims." Karen stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. "This is insane. You're crazy." But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out more printouts than next-door posts from other victims. The BBB complaints, the news article about the charity fraud. "Karen, you've been running cons for months," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the NAS silent coffee shop. "You steal cars to run fake rental businesses. You take money from children's hospital fundraisers. You destroy people's property and disappear. But you made one mistake. What? Karen whispered, her arrogance finally cracking. You picked the wrong father to mess with. The dispatcher was still on the line. Sir, we have units en route to your location. Please stay on the line. Karen's composure completely shattered. You don't understand. I have important clients. I have deals closing. You can't do this to me. Like the disabled veteran whose wheelchair van you destroyed. Or the elderly woman you scammed out of her life savings with a fake property investment. Karen's eyes darted toward the exit, but Marcus had positioned himself between her and the door. Other customers were now openly staring and recording with their phones. I can pay you, Karen said desperately. Whatever your car is worth, I can pay you right now. With what money? The insurance fraud money. The charity donations you stole. The deposits from clients for cars you don't actually own. Karen's phone started buzzing frantically. Marcus could see multiple missed calls and text messages appearing on her screen, probably from the clients. She was supposed to be scamming. Today, my business associates, Karen started.
You mean your victims?
Because that's what they are. Karen, you're not a businesswoman. You're a predator who targets hardworking people and destroys their lives for your own entertainment. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Through the window, Marcus could see 2 police cars pulling into the parking lot. Karen made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Look, we can work this out privately. I don't need the police involved. I'll pay for your car. And we can forget this whole thing happened. Like you forgot about hitting my daughter. Like you forgot about the disabled veteran. Like you forgot about all the other people whose lives you've ruined. The police officers entered the Starbucks, and Marcus waved them over. Officers, this is Karen Whitfield, the hit-and-run suspect from case number 247B91. One of the officers, a young woman with sharp eyes, looked at Karen and then at Marcus. Are you Mr. Rivera? Yes, ma'am. And I have extensive evidence of Ms. Whitfield's criminal activities beyond just the hit-and-run. Karen tried one last desperate play. Officers, this man has been stalking and harassing me. He followed me here and cornered me. I want to press charges. But the officer was already examining the printouts Marcus had spread on the table. Ma'am, we've been looking for you for 3 days. You failed to respond to multiple attempts to contact you about the hit-and-run incident. I never got any calls, Karen lied. The officer looked at her phone, which was still buzzing with notifications. Is this your current phone number? Read off the number from the police report. Karen's face went red. I've been busy. Too busy to return calls about a hit-and-run involving a child, but not too busy to post 12 times on social media in the past 3 days. As the officers took Karen into custody, she turned to Marcus with pure venom in her eyes. You have no idea what you've just done. I have lawyers. I have connections. This isn't over. Marcus looked at her calmly. You're right, it's not over. Because I'm going to make sure every single one of your victims knows you've been found. I'm going to make sure every person you've scammed, every family you've hurt, gets their chance at justice. As they led Karen away in handcuffs, her designer blazer wrinkled and her perfect composure finally destroyed, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in days, hope. But the real justice was just beginning. The news of Karen's arrest spread faster than Marcus had anticipated. By that afternoon, his phone was buzzing with calls from local news stations. Other victims who had seen the social media videos from the Starbucks confrontation and Detective Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Rivera, I need to thank you, Detective Chen said over the phone. We've been building a case against Karen Whitfield for months, but she kept slipping through our fingers. Your evidence package has blown this investigation wide open. Marcus was sitting in his brother's living room, watching Sophia color while Carlos worked on his laptop nearby. What do you mean? The social media posts you documented, the victim testimonies you helped us connect. We now have enough to charge her with insurance fraud, identity theft, grand larceny, and about 6 other felonies. The district attorney wants to meet with you tomorrow. After Detective Chen hung up, Carlos looked up from his computer with a grim expression. Marcus, you need to see this. Karen's whole operation was bigger than we thought. Carlos turned his laptop screen toward Marcus. He'd been digging deeper into Karen's digital footprint, and what he'd found was staggering. She's been running this scam across 3 different cities, Carlos explained. Different aliases, different fake businesses, but the same pattern. Hit someone's car, flee the scene, then disappear before anyone can track her down. But that was just the beginning. The laptop screen showed a complex web of fake identities in businesses. Karen Morrison, Karen Walsh, Karen Phillips. Each identity came with social media profiles, fake business licenses, and rental agreements for luxury cars she would use to appear successful to potential victims. "Look at this," Carlos continued, scrolling through financial records he'd found through public databases. "She's been taking deposits for wedding, car rentals, and keeping the money. Fake real estate deals where she collects earnest money and vanishes. Even a medical GoFundMe where she claimed to have cancer." Marcus felt sick. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate: over $400,000 in the past 2 years, targeting working-class families and elderly people, people who can't afford lawyers, people who won't fight back. The doorbell rang. Marcus opened it to find a middle-aged woman with tears in her eyes, holding a printed screenshot from Facebook. "Are you Marcus Rivera, the man who caught Karen?" "Whitfield." "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" "My name is Dorothy Martinez." "That woman, she destroyed my husband's life." Dorothy's story poured out in a rush. 6 months ago, Karen had sold Dorothy's husband a luxury investment property that turned out to be condemned land she didn't even own. Her husband had suffered a heart attack from the stress. When we tried to find her, she had just disappeared, changed her phone number, moved offices, like she never existed. "My husband, ... he hasn't been the same since. He blames himself." Marcus invited Dorothy inside, and within an hour, 3 more victims had arrived after seeing the news coverage. There was James Chen, a recent college graduate, who'd paid Karen $5,000 for a luxury car rental for his wedding that never materialized. Maria Santos, whose elderly mother had given Karen $8,000 for home repairs that were never done. And Robert Kim, the disabled veteran whose wheelchair-accessible van Karen had destroyed in a hit-and-run 2 months ago. "Have insurance," Robert said, his voice bitter. "Said I should be grateful she stopped it all. Then she just drove away while I was sitting in the street in my wheelchair." As the victims shared their stories, a clear pattern emerged. Karen didn't just commit crimes, she psychologically tormented her victims, making them feel worthless, stupid, and responsible for their own victimization. "She called me an idiot for trusting her," Dorothy said. "Read contracts properly. I deserved to lose my money." "She laughed at me," Maria added. "When my mother started crying, Karen actually laughed and said, 'Old people shouldn't handle their own finances if they can't keep up.'" Marcus felt his anger building again, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about his car or even Sophia's trauma anymore. Karen had been systematically destroying lives and enjoying it. His phone rang. Detective Chen again. "Mr. Rivera, we just executed a search warrant on Karen's apartment. You're not going to believe what we found." "What?" "Trophies." She kept trophies from every scam. Photos of her victims crying, screenshots of their desperate text messages begging for their money back. Even recordings of phone calls where people were pleading with her. She was getting off on their pain. The room went silent as Marcus put the phone on speaker so the other victims could hear. "There's more," Detective Chen continued. "We found journals where she rated her victims. She gave them scores based on how much money she could take and how much emotional damage she could cause. Your case, Mr. Rivera, she wrote that she was especially proud of traumatizing your daughter, because single fathers are particularly vulnerable to guilt manipulation." Gasped. Robert's hands clenched into fists. Marcus felt something cold and dark settle in his chest. "She planned to contact you in a few weeks," Detective Chen continued, "pretending to be a sympathetic insurance agent who could help you get compensation. Then she was going to scam you out of whatever settlement money you managed to get." The scope of Karen's cruelty was breathtaking. She wasn't just a criminal, she was a predator who fed on human suffering. Carlos had been quietly working on his laptop throughout the conversation. Now he looked up with fire in his eyes. "Marcus, I found her lawyer, the one she was bragging about having connections with. He's been arrested twice for insurance fraud. And her business associates, they're all either victims or other scammers she was working with." The local news van pulled up outside Carlos's house just as Karen's bail hearing was being broadcast. Live. Marcus and the other victims watched as Karen, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit instead of designer clothes, stood before the judge. Karen's public defender was arguing for reasonable bail, claiming she had community ties and wasn't a flight risk. But then the prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant has been operating under at least 4 different identities across 3 cities. We have evidence of over 30 separate victims and estimated damages in excess of $400,000. She has no legitimate address, no verifiable employment, and has already demonstrated a pattern of fleeing accountability. Be denied." Karen's face crumpled as the judge agreed with the prosecution. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. As the news coverage continued, showing Karen being led back to her cell, Marcus felt a sense of completion that went beyond personal revenge. Dorothy was crying not from sadness, but from relief. Robert was sitting straighter in his wheelchair than he had in months. "She can't hurt anyone else," Maria whispered. But Marcus knew their work wasn't finished. Karen's arrest was just the beginning. Now came the real justice, making sure every victim got their money back, every crime was prosecuted, and every person Karen had destroyed got the chance to rebuild. Karen Whitfield's reign of terror was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, Marcus stood in the packed courthouse gallery as the preliminary hearing began. The prosecutor, District Attorney Lisa Hernandez, had assembled what she called one of the most comprehensive fraud cases in the county's history. Karen sat at the defendant's table in her orange jumpsuit, looking nothing like the arrogant woman who had dismissed Marcus at the accident scene. Her designer clothes had been replaced with prison garb, her perfect hair was unwashed and stringy, and her eyes darted nervously around the courtroom as if searching for an escape that would never come behind. Marcus sat row after row of victims. Dorothy Martinez and her husband, who had driven 3 hours to be there. Robert Kim in his wheelchair, flanked by fellow veterans who had heard his story. Maria Santos with her elderly mother, who insisted on coming, despite her frail health. James Chen with his new wife, still wearing the simple wedding rings they'd bought with the money Karen had stolen. 37 victims in total, each one representing a life Karen had tried to destroy. "Your Honor," Da Hernandez began, "the defendant has been charged with 43 felonies across multiple jurisdictions. Today's hearing will establish that Karen Whitfield operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise designed to target, exploit, and psychologically torture vulnerable members of our community." Karen's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named David Walsh, stood to respond. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence of these charges. We believe this is a case of mistaken identity and circumstantial evidence blown out of proportion by social media hysteria." Marcus almost laughed. Even now, Karen was trying to deny reality. The prosecution's first witness was Detective Chen, who methodically presented the evidence Marcus had helped compile. Social media posts, financial records, victim testimonies, the journals found in Karen's apartment. Detective Chen Da Hernandez said, "Can you tell the court about the defendant's victim selection process? Based on our investigation, the defendant specifically targeted single parents, elderly individuals, immigrants, and disabled persons. She researched their financial situations, family circumstances, and emotional vulnerabilities before approaching them." And what was the purpose of this research? To maximize both the financial damage and the psychological trauma she could inflict. Her journals contained detailed plans for how to isolate victims from their support systems and make them blame themselves for being victimized. Karen's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the testimony to continue. Detective Chen, did you find evidence that the defendant derived emotional satisfaction from her victim's suffering? Yes. We found over 200 audio recordings of her victims crying, begging for their money back, or describing the hardships her crimes had caused. She had organized these recordings into playlists, labeled things like Greatest Hits and Christmas, Morning, which she apparently listened to for entertainment. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Even Karen's attorney looked shocked. The next witness was Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Karen's behavior patterns. Dr. Williams, in your professional opinion, what motivated the defendant's criminal behavior? The defendant displays characteristics consistent with malignant narcissism and antisocial personality disorder. Her crimes weren't primarily motivated by financial need, but by a pathological desire to dominate and humiliate others. She appears to have viewed her victims as entertainment rather than human beings. Can you elaborate on that assessment? The defendant kept detailed records not just of the money she stole, but of the emotional responses she generated. She rated victims based on how dramatically they reacted to being scammed. The more pain she caused, the higher she scored the experience. Marcus watched Karen's face as the psychologist testified. For the first time since her arrest, Karen showed real emotion, not remorse, but rage at being analyzed and exposed. Then came the victim impact statements. Dorothy Martinez went first, her voice shaking but determined. "Your Honor," Karen Whitfield didn't just steal our money. She stole my husband's faith in humanity. He hasn't been able to trust anyone since she scammed us. He won't even let me answer the door anymore because he's afraid everyone is trying to hurt us. Robert Kim was next. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've been shot at, mortared, and blown up by IEDs, but nothing prepared me for the cruelty of this woman. When she hit my van and drove away, she didn't just leave me stranded in the street. She laughed. She actually rolled down her window and laughed at a disabled veteran sitting in traffic. One by one, the victims told their stories. The elderly woman who hadn't eaten for 3 days because Karen had stolen her grocery money. The young father who had to tell his children they couldn't have Christmas presents because Karen had taken their savings. The immigrant family who feared deportation after Karen convinced them they had committed fraud by trusting her. When it was Marcus's turn, he stood and looked directly at Karen. "Your Honor, Karen Whitfield tried to kill my daughter. Maybe not with a gun or a knife. But she ran a red light and slammed into our car at 35 miles per hour with a 3-year-old in the back seat. Then she looked at my terrified child and drove away like we were roadkill." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. "But the real crime wasn't the hit and run. It was what she planned to do next. She was going to come back into our lives, pretend to help us, and then steal what little we had left. She was going to use my daughter's trauma as a weapon against us." He paused, looking around the courtroom at the faces of the other victims. "Karen Whitfield is a predator who feeds on human suffering. She doesn't deserve sympathy or leniency. She deserves to face the full weight of justice for every life she's destroyed." After the victim statements, DA Hernandez presented her final evidence. Financial records showing that Karen had spent her victims' money on luxury items, vacations, and gambling, while her victims struggled to pay for basic necessities. "Your Honor, the defendant stole Christmas presents from children to buy herself designer handbags. She took grocery money from elderly people to pay for spa treatments. She stole a disabled veteran's transportation money to fund her gambling addiction. This isn't just fraud, it's economic terrorism." Karen's attorney made a brief, half-hearted argument about rehabilitation and second chances, but even he seemed to recognize the hopelessness of the situation. When the judge asked Karen if she wanted to make a statement, she stood up slowly. Marcus expected another denial, another attempt to play the victim. Instead, Karen looked around the courtroom with the same cold arrogance she'd shown at the accident scene. "You people act like you're so innocent," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "like you didn't deserve what happened to you. But you did. You were weak, and I was strong. You were stupid, and I was smart. That's how the world works." The courtroom erupted. Several victims stood up, shouting at Karen. The judge banged his gavel for order, but Karen wasn't finished. "You think putting me in prison makes you winners? You're still the same pathetic losers you were before. The only difference is now you have someone to blame for your failures." Marcus felt the entire courtroom's shock and outrage, felt something else, pity. Karen Whitfield was so broken, so devoid of basic humanity, that she couldn't even recognize her own destruction. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "I've been on this bench for 22 years, and I have never encountered a defendant who showed such complete lack of remorse or empathy. Ms. Whitfield, you are a danger to society, and this court will ensure you can never harm another innocent person." He looked down at his notes, then back at Karen. "On the charge of aggravated vehicular assault, guilty. On the charges of grand theft auto, guilty. On the charges of insurance fraud, identity theft, and racketeering, guilty on all counts." Face went white as the guilty verdicts continued. 43 felonies, 43 convictions. Sentencing is scheduled for next Friday. Until then, the defendant will remain in custody without bail. As the bailiffs led Karen away, she turned back to look at Marcus one final time. But instead of the hatred he expected to see, her eyes held something else, the dawning realization that her victims had won. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, but Marcus arrived at the courthouse 2 hours early. He wanted to be there when Karen Whitfield faced the final consequences of her reign of terror. The media attention had grown. Beyond anything Marcus had anticipated, news vans lined the street, reporters interviewed victims, and the hashtag Justice for Karen was trending on social media, though not in the way Karen would have wanted. Inside the courthouse, Marcus sat in the front row with Sophia on his lap. His daughter had insisted on coming, and while Marcus had initially resisted, he realized she needed to see that the woman who had hurt them was finally being held accountable. "Is that the bad lady, Daddy?" Sophia whispered as Karen was led into the courtroom in shackles. "Yes, Mia, but she can't hurt anyone anymore." Karen looked like she had aged 10 years in the past month. Her once perfect appearance was gone. Her hair was greasy and unkempt. Her orange jumpsuit hung loosely on her diminished frame, and her eyes had lost their predatory gleam, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who finally understood their situation was hopeless. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, who had built her career prosecuting white-collar criminals, took her seat and surveyed the packed courtroom. Before we proceed with sentencing, I want to address some additional matters that have come to light since the conviction. Judge Morrison began. "Ms. Whitfield, 3 more victims have come forward, and we've discovered evidence of crimes dating back over 5 years. The prosecution is filing additional charges in other jurisdictions." Karen's attorney leaned over to whisper something to her, but she just stared straight ahead, her mask of arrogance finally completely shattered. Additionally, the judge continued, "The state has recovered approximately $127,000 in assets from the defendant's various accounts. These funds will be distributed to the victims as partial restitution." Marcus felt a wave of relief. It wouldn't cover everyone's losses completely, but it was a start. "Now, Ms. Whitfield, this court will hear your statement before sentencing." Karen stood slowly, her shackles clanking. For a moment, Marcus thought she might finally show some remorse, some recognition of the pain she had caused. Instead, Karen looked directly at Marcus and Sophia. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. "You've destroyed my life." The audacity of it. Tevin, now playing the victim, left the entire courtroom stunned. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Ms. Whitfield, in 30 years of practicing law, I have never encountered such a complete absence of remorse or accountability. You have shown no recognition of the pain you've caused, no empathy for your victims, and no understanding that your actions have consequences." The judge pulled out a thick folder. "I've read every victim impact statement. I've reviewed every piece of evidence. I've consulted with psychological experts, and I've come to a conclusion about what kind of sentence will serve both justice and public safety." Karen swayed slightly, as if the weight of her impending fate was finally hitting her. "On the charge of aggravated vehicular assault involving a child, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison. On the charges of grand theft first, second, and third degree, I sentenced you 2 consecutive terms, totaling 25 years. On the charges of identity theft, insurance fraud, and racketeering under the RICO Act, I sentence you to an additional 30 years. The math hit the courtroom like a physical blow. 70 years total. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling $847,000. You are banned from operating any business, handling other people's money, or using social media for the duration of your parole period, which, given your age and sentence length, will likely be the rest of your natural life." Karen's legs gave out. She collapsed into her chair, the reality finally breaking through her delusions of invincibility. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm also issuing a judicial statement to be entered into the record and published publicly. You targeted the most vulnerable members of our society's single parents, elderly citizens, disabled veterans, immigrant families, and you did it not out of desperation or need, but for the pleasure of causing suffering." The judge's voice grew harder. "You kept trophies of your victims' pain. You rated their anguish like it was entertainment. You planned to re-victimize families you had already destroyed. You represent everything this justice system exists to protect society from. Marcus felt. Sophia squeezed his hand as the judge delivered her final words. You will serve every day of this sentence. There will be no early release, no parole, no reduction for good behavior. You will grow old in prison, and you will die knowing that every single person you tried to destroy went on to live full, happy lives while you rotted in a cage of your own making. As the bailiffs moved to escort Karen away, she turned one last time toward the gallery of her victims. But instead of defiance or hatred, her face showed something Marcus hadn't expected: pure, absolute terror. The predator had finally realized she had become prey. "Wait," she called out desperately. "I want to make a deal. I can give you information about other scammers. I can help." But Judge Morrison had already stood and was leaving the bench. Karen's time for deals and manipulation was over. As the bailiffs dragged her away, Karen's composure finally broke completely. "This isn't fair," she screamed. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a businesswoman. You can't do this to me." Her voice echoed through the courthouse hallway until the heavy doors cut it off forever. In the sudden silence that followed, Marcus looked around at the faces of Karen's victims. Dorothy Martinez was crying tears of relief. Robert Kim was saluting from his wheelchair. Maria Santos was holding her elderly mother, both of them smiling for the first time in months. But it was what happened next that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. One by one, the victims began to stand and applaud. Not for revenge or cruelty, but for justice. For the knowledge that Karen Whitfield would never hurt another innocent person. For the proof that sometimes, when good people fight back, they win. As Marcus carried Sophia out of the courthouse, she looked up at him with her big brown eyes and asked, "Daddy, is it over now?" Marcus looked back at the courthouse where Karen Whitfield would never walk free again, then at the group of victims who had found their voices and their strength. Then at his daughter who had survived trauma and would grow up knowing that justice exists. "Yes, Mia," he said, lifting her higher. "It's over. The bad lady can never hurt anyone again." But as they walked toward Carlos's car, Marcus realized it wasn't really over. It was just beginning. Because Karen's victims weren't victims anymore. Were survivors, advocates, and proof that predators could be stopped when people refused to stay silent. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his driveway next to his brand new Honda Civic, paid for with his share of Karen's restitution, fund watching Sophia play in the yard. His phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy Martinez, saw the news about Karen getting attacked in prison. Apparently, even the other inmates hate her. Sometimes karma needs a little help. Marcus smiled and deleted the message. Karen Whitfield was no longer his problem. She was just a cautionary tale about what happens when predators finally meet their match. And in a few years, when Sophia was old enough to understand, Marcus would tell her the story of how a little girl and her father brought down a monster not with violence or hatred, but with courage, evidence, and an unshakable belief that justice still existed in the world. The hammer had fallen. Justice had been served. And Karen Whitfield would spend the rest of her life learning that actions have consequences, even for people who thought they were untouchable, especially for people who thought they were untouchable.